Welcome to the Missing Milwaukee walking tour, also known as the Parking Lots Walking Tour. As most of you know, downtown Milwaukee has many historic buildings from the 19th and early 20th century. After the stock market crash, new construction came to a standstill and didn't begin to fully recover until the 1970s. Since then, many of the older buildings have been replaced with newer buildings or been lost to fires and urban renewal projects. Some have also been the victims of neglect and were torn down to be replaced with parking lots. When the buildings became difficult to rent, parking lots were always easy moneymakers for the property owners. Today's tour will take you on a journey to the sites of several of the former buildings in the Missing Milwaukee book. The book shows unseen photographs of these buildings prior to their demolitions in the 1970s and 1980s. This will be an architectural history tour, and I'll explain quite a bit about the history of the missing buildings as well as the adjacent remaining buildings. The tour will also be a preservation tour, which should leave you with an understanding of why buildings like these should be preserved. So let's take a walk and try to see the lost buildings of Milwaukee. Let's stop for a little background as we cross into the old settlement of Kilbourne Town. Starting in the fall of 1835, after the government land sales in Green Bay, the city was divided into three settlements by the three new owners. Solomon Juneau established Juneautown east of the Milwaukee River. Byron Kilbourne founded his Kilbournetown west of the river, and George Walker founded Walker's Point on land south of the Menominee River and the Milwaukee River. The founders surveyed and subdivided their holdings to create boom towns, enticing settlers and land speculators. In 1837, there were two towns named Milwaukee, after the Indian name for the village, but with slightly different spellings. The competition for settlers grew fierce and eventually led to the infamous Bridge Wars in 1845, which destroyed the Juneau Street, the Wells Street, Wisconsin Avenue, and Menominee Street bridges. By May of 1839, the Juneau and Kilbourne settlements were consolidated into one town of Milwaukee, and the city was finally incorporated in 1846. But the division has always remained, and even today the parts of downtown are distinctly different. This spot grew important as a confluence of trade in the late 19th century brought ships from many ports along the Great Lakes with travelers and goods into the heart of the city. The Goodrich docks were the main entry point into Milwaukee, and large steamers filled with people would regularly arrive and depart right here. Once a depression hit Milwaukee, travel by steamship slowed, and by 1930 the docks were raised to be replaced by a parking lot. There was a time when Michigan Street was more than a place to find a parking spot in the many parking structures that now line the street. This was one of the entry points into the city for visitors getting off the boats at the river, the trains at the North Shore Depot on 6th Street, the interurbans at the Public Service Building at 2nd Street, or the trains at Union Station at 3rd Street. Hotels, restaurants, and other businesses were built along Michigan to take advantage of the proximity to these stations and make it easy to reach the throngs of visitors and traveling businessmen. The Enterprise Building was one of the business buildings built with this proximity in mind. It was a large 6-story brick building in the Beaux-Arts style, built in 1906 for August Eline of the Brewing family. This was a classic Kirchhoff and Rose design, faced in white glazed terracotta and beautiful ornamentation with a grand entrance on Michigan Street. The glazed terracotta was desirable for maintaining a pristine look even in the smoke-filled air of the time. It offered a large number of offices for small and large businesses in this growing business district. It was demolished in 1980 for the Grand Avenue Mall parking structure. Prior to its demolition, the entrance facade pictured in the book was salvaged and now sits in storage waiting for use in another grand entrance. The only building that remains from the time when this was a busy commercial center is the Public Service Building across the street, built at the same time. It was the home of the electric interurban trains that ran around the region, and also headquartered several regional bus lines. It even played a bit part in the beginning of the 1960 film The Rat Race, starring Tony Curtis. Many of the old hotels that lined Michigan Street were torn down in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and in most cases replaced with parking structures. Diners and small shops catering to the once busy foot traffic have also disappeared. Michigan Street now has the feel of a back alley instead of the traffic-filled and busy thoroughfare that it once was. The proximity to Union Station created a hotel district in this area. Long-gone hotels like the Medford, the Royal, the Delaware, the Antlers, to name a few, provided well-used accommodations until the station was relocated in 1965 and the North Shore Railroad closed in 1963. The only remaining hotel from this era is the Hilton on 5th and Wisconsin. The Randolph Hotel was an elegant 12-story, 150-room hotel built for jeweler Archie Tegmeyer. It was built in April 1927, with Burr Randolph operating the hotel. The hotel bore the coat of arms of Edmund Randolph, the first Attorney General of the United States. In 1932, Mr. Tegmeyer lost the building after defaulting on the payments, a victim of the stock market crash of 1929. The entire building was then possessed by the property owner, George Foster. The Foster Realty Company sold the building and property in 1956, but by then had already been renting many of its rooms to long-term residents looking for cheap downtown housing. By the 1980s, it was one of several former downtown hotels specializing in rentals to low-income residents and older people on fixed incomes. The city acquired the property in June 1984 by condemnation order with plans to redevelop it in the future. It was demolished in July 1985 in a controlled detonation which brought all 12 stories down in seconds. A surface parking lot has replaced the hotel, and to this day no development plans have progressed past the planning process. Since its demolition, this block has been an albatross of neglect, and even the construction of the convention center across the street has not led to any improvements. It is currently owned by the City Redevelopment Authority. Let's take a stop here at what is called the City Yard Reliquary Garden. This small park was built in 1998 after the completion of the Midwest Express Airline Center. Artist Sheila Klein of Washington assembled artifacts from nearby demolished buildings, including these line heads from the Wisconsin Telephone Exchange on 5th Street. A reliquary garden is a shrine for contemplation, and it is hoped that these remnants of Missing Milwaukee will inspire people to reflect on the beauty that once was. Continuing on Hotel Row, we come to a more recent one that some people may remember. The Belmont Hotel was on this corner before it was torn down in 1996. The 5-story hotel was opened in the fall of 1926 with 150 rooms. It was a modern but modest design by architect Martin Tulgren & Sons with beautiful glazed terracotta ornamentation. The sign that heralded the coffee shop on 4th Street was an icon of Art Deco style. The coffee shop, a barber shop, and the Belmont Bar were located on the ground floor. Across the street is the Commerce Building, which Tulgren built a few years later. It doesn't have as much interesting terracotta ornamentation as the Belmont did, but it has the same Tulgren style. By the time the Belmont was slated for demolition as part of the proposed Wisconsin Center, the hotel was a haven for low-income living, offering rooms at $200 a month. A final crazy farewell party for tavern regulars and residents was held at the Belmont Tavern on March 27, 1996, and by June, the building was just a memory. The Convention Center, which replaced the Belmont and other buildings, has been moderately successful at transforming this area of downtown. Although its style might be labeled as too kitschy, it functions well to draw attention to the street level, as opposed to the previous Convention Center, Mecca, that was located on Kilbourne, but in the end, it only functions as a convention center. When conventions are over, it remains lifeless. The Pabst Building was designed by Chicago architect Solomon Beeman and was built in 1892 in a Romanesque revival style with similarities to Milwaukee City Hall. An ornately sculpted stone archway was located on the main entrance on the East Wisconsin Avenue side of the building. In 1948, A major renovation replaced the decaying copper towers with modern squared-off roof lines, which also added more office space. The building changed names a few times, becoming known as the Title Guarantee Building and then the 110 East Wisconsin Building. In the spring of 1981, the building was demolished, and the last portion of the building to fall was a substantially constructed stone archway. It was toppled to the ground in one piece in an attempt to preserve it and assemble it elsewhere. During the process, it suffered too much damage and was hammered down to be hauled away to the landfill. The grassy property sat vacant for several years until the new 110 East Wisconsin building began construction in 1988 and was finished in September 1989. The new building, known as the Faison Building, is a successful skyscraper that works well in the heart of downtown and mimics the style of its predecessor. The final questions that I want everyone to think about are these. Was it necessary to tear down these buildings and the others shown in the book? When you start to tear down a number of buildings in an urban renewal project, what happens to the life in that area of town? How can we repair some of the damage that was done to bring life back to Michigan Street? How can some of the parking lots and garages be reclaimed to accomplish that? Thank you for watching.